Anyway, up next, Karl Kapp. And I used to say it a different way, but now I got it the right way. So not Kapp, it's Kapp. So Karl Kapp, he is an expert in e-learning. However, in particular, he focuses on games and gamification. Teaching, he's a professor back east right now, University of Pittsburgh, and he's also an author on lynda.com. I remember the first time that I met him, he was speaking at the Lectora User Conference, and he was sitting out at a table after that, and he was giving out his book, so I wanted to get his autograph on the book. So I went over there and chatted for a while. Just a nice individual. It's wonderful and pleasant to talk to. We've interacted since then. Really excited to have him, and we're glad you're here, Karl.
Great, thanks, Andrew.
Our next guest is a professor, author, consultant, and speaker. As a practicing knowledge broker, he frequently speaks to businesses, corporations, professional societies, universities, and nonprofit organizations, including the stage at TEDx Navesink. Please welcome to eLBX, Dr. Karl Kapp.
So yeah, Jackson Pollock is my favorite artist because he's the only artist I could even come close to in terms of artwork. So I always say if it looks like art, it's not something I would do. Okay, so what I want to talk about is thinking like a game designer. So we're going to take you out of being instructional designers and developers for a little while, and I want you to become game designers. So you are now a game designer at the Super Game Corporation, but unfortunately we've hit some hard times here. It's Friday, it's 4:59, and you only have two things on your mind: pizza and beer. And not necessarily in that order, right? So suddenly your boss calls you and your colleague into your office, into her office. Ito, Jasmine, come into my office. Look, someone wants us to create a game about capturing dragons. It appears to be, you know, a craze or something like that. And the working name is Dragonmon Go. Okay, so you're not working for the most creative game company, but still it's a game company. Okay, you're going to compete internally for the project to see who's going to win in this project and who gets the right to work on the project. Each team is going to be confronted with 3 questions, and the team that correctly answers the most questions, you get to win the work. What about the other team, you probably are thinking? Well, the other team gets watching paint dry. Yeah, that's not the most exciting game to work on. I've heard about that game. I'd much rather work on capturing dragons. Okay, so let's get it together here and let's get started. So let's hear about the capturing dragon game. So the first decision that you need to make is we're going to tell the player 3 things they need to know about. Oh, let's do this first. We want to, Andrew, if you go back, we're going to put you on a team. So I want you to take out your texting devices. I know everybody has one. And you're going to go ahead and sign up for Team Moxie or Team Zest. So if we want to switch the slide there, we'll go ahead and let you pick your team. Okay, so I want you to log into pollev.com/Karl Kapp. And then you can pick either Team Moxie or Team Zest. How about everybody on this side, my left, pick Team Zest? Everybody on this side pick Team Moxie. People in the middle, you know, you're adults, just figure it out. So choose one of the teams that you want to be on. So it's pollev.com/Karl Kapp, and that will tell the game design team that you're on, and we'll see how the 2 teams are doing. Now, not to put any pressure on you, but my students would already be done by this point, but that's okay. Take your time. We've got plenty of time to go ahead and choose your team. Okay, I see some action here. Maybe. Has everybody gotten in? Has anybody gotten in? So is the internet like really letting me down today? It could be. You're not getting the team question? Okay, well, let's abandon this then, and we'll punt. Okay, I love technology. Sometimes it lets you do miracles, and sometimes it crushes your soul. Okay, so right now, let's make the first decision. So we're going to do this the old-fashioned way. So should we tell the player 3 things they need to know about capturing dragons when we create this game? Or should we begin by having the players start capturing dragons right away? So how many people think we should start capturing dragons right away? We just jump into it. Okay, and how many people think, no, we really need to tell the players about capturing dragons, right? So the hands, people like, yeah, I don't want to be wrong, so I'm not going to raise my hand too high. I'll just raise it a little bit. That way you're half right and half wrong. But actually what we want to do is we want to have players capture dragons right away. What we do is we spend too much time with instruction. We do application before mastery is what we really want to do. And does that answer make sense? Well, not sure, right? Game designers know that games are engaging because they require action right away. But we as instructional designers tend not to do that. We do something like, for example, create learning objectives. Sometimes I call them learning objections because they're interesting statements, right? So for example, we might say, I'm going to teach you in sales, I'm going to teach you 3 methods to know how to close a sale. And what does a good salesperson say? I know 4 methods, this is a waste of my time, right? But what if you change it to a question and said, do you know the #1 way of closing sales in our organization? Now you have my attention. Maybe I know, maybe I don't. Now I'm answering the question. So we want to have action right away. Action draws in the player and it encourages them to engage further, and it actually is a good thing to do. So we're going to start by capturing dragons. In fact, too often learning events are about content and not about action or performance. In fact, game design is about action. I say instructional design is often about content. And what game designers know that instructional designers tend not to know is that action draws learners in, content, not so exciting. So we want people to be doing things. So we want learners to do things like answering questions, making decisions, working problems, solving mysteries, escaping a room, or playing a game. We want to get people engaged in the process sooner rather than later, but we tend to want to explain everything that you need to do before you get started. But video games don't work that way, right? When you play a video game, they put you in level 1. Immediately, you have to run from point A to point B. And you might not even be successful, but you try again. So we want to try to engage action. And then something simple. So this is a really interesting study. Well, to me as a faculty member. But anyway, so they took people for 4 minutes. They gave them concepts that they had to learn. And then they broke the group into 2 groups. One, every 15 seconds had to reread and review the content. The other ones, they gave them questions about that content. Now, after 4 minutes of reading that content, there was no way you could memorize that content. But what they did was they tested people on that content. After they tested them, they gave them 2 tests, one like right after and one 18 weeks later. The people who were tested on the content performed far better than the people just reread or reviewed the content. So actually retrieving something from your mind, from your memory, actually changes that memory, actually encodes it more deeply. So you really want to use testing as a really good methodology of teaching. Testing shouldn't be the ultimate, oh, did they learn it? Testing can actually be used as a methodology for learning. So it can be pretty powerful. I already gave away the end. So think like a game designer, think action. That's what I want you to do. Next, should we provide a map of the location of all the dragons, or should we create a sense of mystery? So how many people think we need a map? Okay, you're all with me. A couple people. There's always 1 or 2, right? And then how many people think we should have mystery? And how many people are just abstaining because, okay. So basically we want to have mystery and curiosity built into the games. Think about your learning. Think about, do you provide open loops or do you provide closed loop? Like I talked about with the question. So a quick question. How many of you have ever, picture this, it's 11 o'clock at night, you're really tired, you've got an 8 o'clock meeting the next morning, you're flipping through the channels and all of a sudden you come across Law and Order. And now you can't go to sleep until you find out, does that scumbag go to jail? And then you watch and you find it was a repeat, but you forgot about it, right? That's an open loop. We want to have open loops in our learning to keep engagement going. If we do closed loop, like the learning objectives that are sentences, we can't get people involved. So we want to create some mystery. So we want to reveal the locations throughout the player's journey. And so there's a notebook on the subject. She wrote one. So curiosity in game environments evokes providing an optimal level of informational complexity. Now, one of the things that we're always taught in instructional design is you break things down to the easiest possible subject, and then you kind of build up the knowledge, right? it turns out that's not always the best way to teach something. As humans, we kind of like to figure out complexity. We like to wrestle with complexity. So we don't always want the simplest answers. In fact, if something's too simple, you will actually tend to drown it out. We'll turn it off until something more complex comes along. So we want to make sure that we have mystery and complexity, and mystery is when there's a gap between the known and the unknown. So we want to create this sense of unknown so people go, what is this? How do I figure this out? In fact, we want to do things like add novelty, add complexity. We want to do things like inconsistency, like this doesn't make sense or doesn't make sense or I'm not sure. One good thing to do before, for example, a leadership class is send out a leadership question. In this kind of leadership situation, what would you do? And people would answer the question, and some people would then come to class and talk about it. We've even sent out questions where every answer was wrong. And then people come to class and they're already debating the answers. And we've done the opposite, where every answer was right. No, I'm right. No, I'm right. But now you have this discussion. You have this open loop. Inability to predict the future. What will you think will happen next? A really good question to ask is in instruction is, what would be the next step? What would you do in this situation? What should this person do? And I saw this really fascinating study from Harvard the other day that showed that we always think we learn from our mistakes, but it actually, and we do, but it actually turns out that, oh, I'm already spoiling my next slides. But anyway, it turns out that we learn a lot from observing other people's mistakes in organizations. So all the time we create instruction and everything's right and everything's sunny and rosy, and then people go back to their cube or their desk and life doesn't work like that, right? So it might be a good idea in training, in developing instruction, to show people making mistakes and how to fix those mistakes. Now, if any of you are in compliance or talking to legal and regulatory, the hair on your back of your neck is already sticking up, like they'll never let us do that. But I've actually worked with some organizations where that has been the case. They've actually let that happen. So we want to create a sense of suspense and mystery that draws people into games, but it can draw them into learning as well. The other thing we need to think about when we do that learning is, Gagne's 9 events of instruction. The first event is gain attention, but that doesn't mean you only ever do that once. You have to gain attention all the way and continually through the instruction. I'll give you an example of how much fun I am on a Friday night. We'll be watching CSI, my wife and I will come on, and I'll turn to her and I'll say, hey, I wonder if anybody's going to die this episode. So we're not the most exciting people in the world, but and apparently neither am I. You guys, it's kind of a slow audience here. But anyway, totally, that's on you. So anyway, we're talking about CSI. So, but what they do is they have these kind of curves of interest is in what happens. So for example, you watch in CSI and all of a sudden you're like, oh, that guy, he so did it. Like every clue is pointing to him. And my wife's like, yeah, that's the guy. And I say, well, what time is it? Because if we're only 5 minutes in the show, that guy did not do it. That guy did not. It's way too early for him to have actually committed the crime. And shows know that now. So sometimes they'll like, oh, this guy did it. And then you're like, no, the butler did it. And then you're like, no, the first guy did it, right? So they grab our attention and keep it going. Same kind of thing in the development of instruction. How are we grabbing someone's attention and keeping it through that instruction? We use open loops. We use the stories. We use mystery. We use suspense. So we want to draw people into learning using those techniques as well. So next question, should we make the game easy or challenging? How many people think we should make it easy? Okay, there are people paying attention. Okay, how many people think we should make it challenging? Yeah, how many people like, well, in some cases challenging, some cases easy? Yeah, how many people what? How many people think it depends on the audience? It does depend on the audience, absolutely. In fact, novice learners need more hand-holding than experts. But most of the time, we're not teaching novice learners. We're teaching people who have had experience, yet we treat them sometimes like novice learners. So we need to know our audience, absolutely. We need to know the content, absolutely. But we need to give sometimes our learners a little bit more credit than we do. Not always, but we need to know our audience. So we need to make it somewhat challenging. In fact, there's a concept called desirable difficulty, which was developed by Robert and Elizabeth Bork. And the concept of desirable difficulty is that in short term, if learning is really easy and you can get it quickly, you'll do really well on the tests. You'll do really well on the content. but weeks later, you won't remember anything. But if you struggle to understand, if you struggle to learn something, if you struggle with the content in a desirable way, not just because it's really hard or really difficult, but if you do desirable difficulty, you'll actually learn and recall it and be able to apply it much more effectively in the future than immediately after the instruction. In fact, there was a really interesting study. They went to a school and they implemented a new software system to help analyze the performance of all the students. And it was really, analytics is really big right now. People want to do analytics. Teachers had all this analytical information. It wasn't changing anything. The teachers weren't understanding it. They weren't getting it. It wasn't happening. So the principal said, look, shut down the computer system. We're not doing that. We're going to work all this out by hand. I want you to tally the students' scores. I want you to go through that. I want you to do all that. The teachers struggled through that. Of course, they weren't happy, right? Teachers got 1,000,000+5 things to do. They now had to do all this by hand. It wasn't very exciting for them. But as they did the work and really got close to it, they understood the numbers. They understood the information, and they could apply it. They had this degree of desirable difficulty. So next time you're creating instruction, think about, can I add things in there that will really make people struggle and think with some of the concepts and some of the ideas and then apply that. Now, to the earlier point, if you're just teaching somebody the features and functionality of a product, you might not need to do that. So you need to be strategic about when you're applying these instructional strategies, but think about the right time to do it and the right audience. In fact, research shows that our brains actually grow when we make a mistake. There's actually electronic synapses that occur, and it even occurs when we don't know that it's occurring. But if the brain doesn't know the answer, it does this little bit of struggling, and we might not even know that it's struggling, but it's building our knowledge. And the scientists think it's because we don't know the answer. And so our brain's not 100% certain of the answer and kind of works with it. So it's really interesting how mistakes and problems can actually help us with our learning and our knowledge. So we want to encourage the freedom to fail. We want people to struggle a little bit in their events. Now, it's really easy for me to say, standing up on the stage, saying, hey, make your learner struggle, until they come to your office and go, that was the hardest question I ever had. This training's stupid, and da-da-da-da-da-da. You got to make it easier, right? And it's not them. They tell their manager, and then your manager comes and complains to you about the difficulty of the instruction. But I always say this, or it's a trick, right? I always say, well, when you're dealing with a customer, does a customer ever have a difficult or a tricky situation? And they're always like, well, yeah. And I say, well, why should the first difficult or tricky situation be with that customer? Shouldn't it be while you're actually training to do that? I had one person come up to me one time and said, hey, you talk about simulations and everything. Someone once told me that, this was in a hospital, that in a hospital simulation, you shouldn't have the patient die because it's too traumatic for the learner. And I said, well, let me ask this question. Does anybody in this hospital ever come here and die? Because if the answer is no, this is where I'm coming when I get sick. And they're like, well, no, unfortunately, people do pass away sometimes at the hospital. I said, well, why would you want their first experience with death to be right in front of that patient's family, or having to deal with it? So we want to provide training that's tough, that helps people. So if you look at military preparation, right? They train you, Top Gun, for example. They train in a really difficult situation in Top Gun. Why? Because they want those pilots to be able to react in any situation and know how to react. So we want to kind of keep that in mind. So you want to kind of think of those difficult situations. It aids in learning, and it's also motivational. So people are motivated when they have three things: autonomy, mastery, and what's called relatedness. Isn't that the self-determination theory? Well, yes, it is. So the self-determination theory has three items. Autonomy means the ability to make your own decisions. Relatedness means socialness that we talked about. And autonomy, relatedness, and mastery. Of course, mastery means knowing how to do something. Thank you for that. Or memorizing things. If we look at the gamification and game elements, not all game elements are equal. So some game elements like badges, leaderboards, and performance graphs impact mastery and the meaningfulness of the task. But others, like avatars, meaningful stories, and teammates, affect the social relatedness. So don't just blindly adopt gamification elements. Use those elements strategically as you develop the instruction. So lots of information. One more question. Which team gets to design Dragonmon Go? Well, you're all winners to me. Ugh. We didn't have the technology, so I'm just going to appoint the people in the back. You guys win. Congratulations. You've got bragging rights for the rest of the conference. I'm not going to define back, so you can pick wherever you want that to be. So tips, begin with activity. So have your learners do something right away. Create curiosity so that the learners want to know more or are intrigued by what's happening next. Create a challenge. Don't make e-learning or any of the development super easy. Make it challenging but audience appropriate. And use game elements appropriately. Not all game elements are effective for all learning events. So be smart about how you do that. Okay, thank you very much.